Hello and welcome to Amazing Stories from the Hood. Stories in large part based on real life. I'll be your host today. My name is Brian. So without further ado, let's get right into it. This story begins in the early 1990s, during the time when crack was pretty prevalent. I was in my early 30s. I was single, didn't have any children. I spent my non-working hours partying, getting drunk, and happened to be urinating behind a trash can after the club closed at 2 o'clock in the morning, and was observed by a police officer who proceeded to arrest me for urinating in public. I was placed in a holding cell where there was one other guy. Let me point out here that while I felt my life was okay, considering there was a time of mass incarceration and people getting killed behind drugs, I thought I was a step above. But just getting back to this guy, I recall the way he was dressed. It really impressed me. I spent my workday wearing coveralls and old clothes, and I spent my time off wearing, at best, khakis. But this guy, he reminded me of somebody off of Miami Vice. He was wearing a peach-colored polo shirt and tan slacks. Not khaki, but slacks. And shoes. It was because of that I recognized that this guy in the holding cell was a couple of steps above me. I was intrigued, and I asked him, what are you in for? And he said, traffic. Now here, going back to that Miami Vice thing I had in my mind, I understood that to be trafficking in cocaine specifically because of the way he was dressed. So I said, do you think you're looking at a lot of time? He's like, for what? Abandoned car? So I says to him, kind of odd that you get arrested for an abandoned vehicle, isn't it? And he said, yeah, but there's a little bit more to it. You got a minute? I'll tell you the whole story. I said, yeah, I'm not going anywhere until Monday. And then he proceeded to tell me his story. He said, I got out of the military a couple of years ago, and times were rough. I ended up being homeless, working day labor until I could get myself a room in a rooming house. After that, I was able to get a job telemarketing and ended up being pretty good at it. So I got myself another job, telemarketing, and at that job, I met a woman who I thought she was cute. She thought I was cute. We got along pretty good. After spending more and more time with her, I learned that she was single, learned that she lived with her brother, and that he was in the Navy. So we were really getting along pretty good. And there was this other girl at the job who would always try and get my attention, and she would always make odd remarks, and she was basically annoying. But it was clear that my interest was in the other girl. I was interested in trying to build a relationship with her, but as I was living in a rooming house, where most of the other people in the rooming house were drug dealers, I didn't feel I was in a position to try and invite her over. So that turned out to be my motivation for moving into an apartment. I was already working 2 part-time telemarketing jobs and realized if I was going to get an apartment, I had to increase my income. I picked up another telemarketing job. At this point now, I'm working from 7 a.m. until 11 p.m. every day. At that third telemarketing job, I found that I was working with the annoying girl from the other job. It was during this first day at work that I found out from the annoying girl that the girl I was talking to at the other job was actually married. So the annoying girl, who I'll now call Ann, short for annoying, she explained that she and the other girl knew each other for years, and that her normal routine was to meet a guy when her husband was on deployment, then tell the guy that she was living with her brother, but it was really her husband, and that would enable her to have a extramarital affair. It was Ann who first told me, if a guy has a relationship with a Navy wife while the husband is deployed, whether it's consensual or not, that guy can be charged with a crime. And that basically she was just setting me up. So this is my first day at the other job, and Ann tells me that she is married and that her only interest is making sure I didn't get caught up. Needless to say, I appreciated what she informed me of, and we started to develop a better friendship. She wasn't quite so annoying. So I ended up cutting it off with the other girl, and as the weeks went on, I still managed to get enough money to get my apartment, and proved to be helpful in providing guidance on how to furnish my apartment, as this was the first apartment I'd ever had, and our friendship blossomed. So a couple of months down the road, Ann tells me that her husband has put his hands on her a couple of weeks before she was telling me, and that very morning he had put his hands on her again, and that she needed someplace safe to go for her and her daughter until she could get to a shelter. So I let her come stay with me, and one thing led to another, and we became intimate. She stayed with me for a week after that, and we were intimate pretty much every day that she stayed with me. So at the end of that week, Ann informs me that she's going to go and move into the shelter. Then she didn't show up for work at any job over the next week, and I didn't hear from her at all. She basically just disappeared. So I kept on moving on with my life and doing the things I was doing. At this point, I have my own place, and I've got a pretty good amount of money. I ended up buying a bike and ended up riding my bike to all of my jobs. That would be approximately 15 miles a day. And so I started getting into the whole bike riding, fitness aspect of it all. And I really got into the bike riding lifestyle. So a few weeks later, I get a call from Ann, and she informs me that she's out of the shelter and she moved back in with her husband, that she was pregnant, they were working on their marriage, and she wanted to thank me for helping her out. So I'm feeling pretty good about being able to help someone, and I'm also feeling good about my life and my lifestyle and where it's going, and things were good. So a couple of months pass and I get another call from Ann. She informs me that she took a paternity test and found out that the baby was not her husband and had to have been mine, but that she didn't want me involved in the child's life, that she was working it out with her husband, and the pregnancy was instrumental in keeping her marriage. This was shocking news, but there was nothing I could do, so I agreed and kept it moving. We didn't have any further contact. It was about 6 months later when she called and informed me that she was going into labor and on her way to the hospital to deliver, and just wanted me to know. At that point, something clicked inside me, and I realized I've actually got a child on the way. And even though I wasn't supposed to be involved, it still was in my mind that I'm about to be a father, but there was nothing I could do about it. So a few months passed, and I received another call from Ann telling me that she gave birth to a son, and that her husband had become very abusive and was also doing drugs, and she was forced to call the police on him, whereupon he got arrested for possession and also domestic violence. Well, needless to say, I was concerned about the welfare of my child and asked, "What about my baby? Are y'all okay?" That's when she said, "Don't worry about anything. I don't need you to come around. I don't want you to be involved. We are all okay over here." And then she hung up. That left me in a certain kind of way. Concerned about what's going on with my child. About this time, I knew where she lived. I knew the neighborhood and that it was not a good neighborhood. So when I had a day off, I went over to that neighborhood, just looking around, and saw outside her apartment, there was a guy who was playing with her daughter and the little baby boy in the front yard. The thing about it was the guy looked like a thug. He looked like trouble. And even though I wasn't supposed to be involved, I was very concerned, but I didn't interfere or otherwise make my presence known. But that realization that that's who she was counting on to provide for the welfare of my child caused me to develop a different way of looking at the responsibility aspect of things, in that I wouldn't be able to take my child to the hospital if I was riding a bike. I realized I had to get a car. I was still working 3 jobs and I had the money, and I found a nice used car in the classifieds, went over, checked it out, I bought it, then I drove it home, because I realized that I still enjoyed riding my bike, but I also satisfied my need to cover the responsibility aspect of being able to provide for my child. It was about a couple of weeks later. I was watching the evening news, and there was a live news report, a shooting that happened in the neighborhood my son was in, and it looked like the newscaster was standing in front of her apartment, reporting the details of a drive-by shooting that happened in the apartment behind her. Well, I became frantic, I admit that, and I jumped up and got in my car and I drove over there. I drove as close as I could, because there was police barriers and a huge crowd of people. There was flashing lights from the ambulance, fire trucks, and police cars. I parked my car, got out, and made my way through the crowd. I could hear in the crowd that were murmuring, and they were saying the baby was killed. And I saw Ann being held by her boyfriend, and next to her was her daughter holding her. And I realized my child was dead. Something snapped. I physically felt something snap inside of me, and I just zoned out. I remember just walking and never turning back, never thinking or feeling anything, just walking. And that's what I did. I walked away. I walked back into what was familiar. I was walking into being homeless again. I walked past street lamps. I walked past bus stops. I walked past everything. But during it all, I recall the only thought that crossed my mind was, I've got to make this right. Somebody's going to pay for my child's death. About a week later, I found myself walking around that neighborhood. My clothes were raggedy and torn, and I looked like a bum. I didn't look anything like I used to look, which afforded me a certain level of anonymity. And I was able to basically stake out the boyfriend's coming and going, which I did for about a week solid. I watched where he went, who he went to visit. I kept track of what he was doing. During this time as well, the grapevine in that neighborhood told that the person who did the drive-by was the brother of her husband. So I found out where he lived. I hung around his neighborhood and watched him and all of his comings and goings and who he was dealing with. And on that weekend, the 30-day anniversary of my son's death, I called on my military training and I went into the boyfriend's house looking for him and found all of his friends instead, and I killed every last one of them. And then I went over to Ann's house and I killed him, and I killed Ann too. I did it quietly while the daughter slept, and then wasting no time, I walked over to the neighborhood where her husband's brother lived and found him at his home with his homeboys sitting around drinking, talking loudly about the drive-by that they performed. And I killed every one of them too. After that, I caught a bus, rode to a part of town where the IHOP was, and sat in there drinking coffee, watching the news. And there was a report of the various killings. They called them mass shootings, and that there was no suspects and no witness. I finished my coffee thinking, I did it. I got away with it. No one knows anything. And after I finished at the IHOP, I got up and went outside, and immediately 3 black SUVs pulled up and surrounded me. Before the guys jumped out, I thought to myself, the dope dealers have found me and it's over for me. But when the occupants jumped out, they were wearing FBI jackets and they arrested me. And I was thinking to myself, they don't know anything. I know I don't have anything on me. So they really probably just getting me for vagrancy. And that's what was on my mind when they sat me in the interrogation room, when one of the agents said to me, we know what you did. We know when you did it. We know how you did it. We watched you do it. We've been watching you since the day your son died, when you walked away and left your car. We found out who you were from your mother, and we have been watching ever since. And we want you to keep doing it. They put me on a payroll, and I was paid to go to different towns and do just what I had done. Take out dope dealers that were untouchable by the law. They gave me a house, car, wardrobe. They set me up with everything. And because I chose to keep riding my bike, that car that they gave me was ticketed for being abandoned. And that's why I'm here, an abandoned vehicle. And they're scheduled to show up within an hour to get me out. I sat back after he told me this, and I was shocked. But that's the story I was told while I was in jail. And that brings to an end the first episode of Amazing Stories from the Hood. I hope you tune in for the next episode. My name is Brian, and I thank you.